Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating period of history, a time when the global power balance just completely flipped on its head. We're talking about the late 1800s and a new, aggressive kind of expansion that literally redrew the map of the world. Let's dive right in. Okay, just for a second, put yourself in the shoes of a European leader back in the late 19th century. Your factories are humming, your navy is top-notch, but you need more raw materials, more places to sell your stuff, and let's be honest, more bragging rights. And all the while, you're watching your rivals gobble up territory all over the world. What do? Well, that's the exact spot the world's great powers found themselves in. So, what made this time so different? Well, by the late 1800s, big players like Great Britain and France decided that just having a few trading posts in Africa and Asia wasn't going to cut it anymore. They wanted more, a lot more. They wanted direct control, kicking off this whole new era of what we now call imperialism. And let's get a clear definition on the table because it's our key term for today. Imperialism, at its core, is just when one country takes control and rules over foreign lands. This is the big idea. The engine that drove, well, everything we're talking about. It's what changed the world so dramatically. Now, this didn't happen in a bubble. At the same time, you had these huge, long-standing powers, like the Ottoman Empire, that were starting to crumble from the inside. They were facing all sorts of internal problems. And that created this giant power vacuum. And you can bet those ambitious European nations were more than happy to jump in and fill it. So that begs the question, right? Why? What was the big push behind all this? Why this sudden mad dash to claim territory all over the globe? Let's break down what was really going on. Well, the reasons are kind of complicated, and they're all tangled together. For starters, you have the economy. Factories needed raw materials, things like rubber and oil, and they also needed new people to sell their products to. Then you've got the political side. Having a huge empire was like the ultimate status symbol. More colonies meant more power on the world stage. Militarily, they needed spots around the globe where their ships could refuel. And of course, there was just plain old competition. If Britain grabbed a piece of Africa, you better believe France and Germany felt like they needed to get their own piece too. And finally, there was this cultural element, this belief that it was a humanitarian duty to go out and spread Western medicine, laws, and religion. Okay, so we know why they wanted to expand, but how did they actually pull it off? See, taking over another country wasn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. The European powers had a whole toolkit of different methods they could use. So you have a few different flavors of control here. On one end of the spectrum, you have a colony, which is total, direct foreign rule. A little more hands-off is a protectorate. Here, a local government is still in place, but an outside power is really pulling the strings. Then there's a sphere of influence, which is more about the money. It gave a foreign power exclusive rights to trade or invest. And last, you have economic imperialism. This is where a country is technically independent, but its whole economy is basically controlled by foreign businesses. Think of something like the Dole Food Company basically running the show in Hawaii. Just to really hammer this home, the big difference between the two most common forms, colony and protectorate, really comes down to direct versus indirect rule. A colony is straight-up direct control by foreigners. A protectorate, though, keeps a local government in place. It creates this illusion of self-rule, but in reality, all the important decisions are still being made by that outside power. It's a really important difference to grasp if you want to understand how these empires actually worked. Right, so these policies weren't just ideas on a piece of paper. They had massive, real-world impacts. They sparked these intense rivalries between empires, and they completely transformed the places they touched forever. You can see this giant geopolitical chess game playing out all across the map. You had the Crimean War, where Britain and Russia basically fought over the future of the Ottoman Empire. In Central Asia, they played what was called the Great Game for control over places like Afghanistan. And in Egypt, this amazing modernization project, the Suez Canal, actually bankrupted the country, which led to the British taking it over. The bottom line here is that this massive chess game had huge, life-altering consequences for the people and nations caught in the crossfire. And we absolutely have to remember, this wasn't a passive takeover. Not at all. All across Africa and Asia, local armies and people fought back, and they fought back hard. But the reality was they were often just outgunned. The technological gap between them and the Western powers was huge. So what was the feeling back home? I mean, what did folks in Europe and America actually think about all of this? Well, it turns out people were really split on the issue. It was a hot debate. On one hand, you had the imperialists arguing they had a moral duty, a responsibility, to spread what they called the blessings of Western civilization. But on the other side, you had anti-imperialists who were like, hold on a second, this is total hypocrisy. They asked how nations that were becoming more democratic at home could turn around and rule over other people without their say-so. They argued it was just a system to make rich people richer by exploiting others. But despite all that debate, the imperialist train had left the station and it was moving fast. By the time the calendar flipped to a new century, the results were pretty undeniable. And by the time we hit the year 1900, it was clear who had won that argument, at least for the time being. The outcome was absolutely staggering. Huge chunks of the planet, we're talking most of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, were now under the thumb of European powers. I mean, think about it. The entire world map was basically redrawn in just a handful of decades. It's wild. And that really brings us to the big takeaway question, doesn't it? When you look at the world today, the borders, the economies, the political hotspots, so many of them trace their roots right back to this era. It really makes you stop and think, right? How much of the world we live in today was actually shaped by this period of foreign rule and economic chess moves?